Welcome today to Peter Merry, who I'm going to conduct another phenomenal conversation with. But before we go into the interview, I just want to explain a little bit about phenomenal conversations. So phenomenal conversations contribute to regenerative culture and regenerative worlding by interviewing change makers like Peter that are living the change, by foregrounding imagination in the midst of the polycrisis, by asking profound questions, and by amplifying meaningfulness and nuance in a chaotic world. So that's the intro. And I was just saying to Peter, I don't usually do the bio. I let my interviewee say a little bit about themselves. But before we get into that, Peter, just what is your current job title and role? Because you've morphed so many times, I've lost a bit of track. So if you were introducing yourself to somebody today, how do you describe yourself? And then we'll get into your bio.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Thanks for the invitation. Nice to be here. I guess now my main role is Chief Executive Weirdo
Okay.
at Wyrd Technologies Limited, which is we'll come on to talk about, but is a company developing consciousness technologies driven by consciousness. I just stepped back from a managing director role at Ubiquity University, where I'm a co-founder, and I'm still involved in my original kind of chief innovation officer role there. But now most of my attention is on the Wyrd companies. Yeah.
Well, we're going to track that interesting journey, and but before we go into those, we're kind of interested in what were the kind of formative or foundational experiences that brought you to Ubiquity. What were the main things you were doing, or what would you, looking back now, what would you say was significant in terms of your journey today?
Well, going back to the kind of moments, I think that awoke my critical mind, I guess, to the world. So I studied French and German originally at Exeter University, and I was very interested in theatre. And I was studying the absurdists, so Sartre, Jarry, Camus, and then this guy called Antonin Artaud, who was a slightly crazy writer, poet, did many different things, was locked up for a number of years. But all of their works got me thinking critically about the nature of reality, really. And I directed a number of plays from that period as well. And then at some point, my mother, who is a Quaker, gave me a copy of Fritz Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful. And I read that, and that really that was the first time, I guess, I started to think, wow, you mean this whole economic system and the way we structure our society is not necessarily being done in the most positive way. And so that kind of radicalized me overnight in a way, and I joined like the NGOs, the Friends of the Earth and the Greenpeace, and got involved in all the protests and became a bit of an eco-activist for a while. And I guess since then I've been continually looking at how to make the biggest possible positive impact with the least effort, not out of laziness perspective, but out of efficiency perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, another key moment was I spent a year in Paris working with a theatre company, and then at the end of that, I was also looking at this whole state of the global economy and how is that all put together, Wolfgang Sachs's work and that kind of thing, Vandana Shiva, and at the end of that year I asked myself, did I think theatre could change the world? And I was, okay, no, not at the moment. So I then signed up for VSO, voluntary service overseas, because I really wanted to understand what it was like in these other contexts, and ended up going to Ghana, in the northern region of Ghana, and a village, teaching English, with 100 kids in the classroom and no electricity and 10 school books or whatever. But I also took a whole bunch of books across with me, like Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, and then Jonathan Porritt's stuff, on green politics. And so there I was, without any kind of cultural handles, being exposed to all of this content, having all these kind of states of consciousness shifts. And at the end of that, my first year, Ghana was going through a structural adjustment program. And so that was when the World Bank, IMF basically said you have to cut public spending to come into the kind of Thatcherite Reaganomics that were the thing at that time. And so they were cutting spending to education. And the school was not well resourced, and kids used to pay with goats and stuff like this instead of money. But then they said they were basically forced to say if you haven't paid your school fees, you won't be allowed into the dining room. And it was a catchment. It was like a boarding school because it was a massive catchment area. And a bunch of the kids then, on the day they enforced that, they went into school and into town and got drunk and stoned and came back and burned down the school.
Wow.
Yeah, so there I was in this village in Ghana, but I could see the chain in my mind of like Washington-based macroeconomic decision taken through the Ghanaian government, enforced because of the debt they had to follow these legislations, and bang, it's, school burned down. So I was like, well, I can stay here and clean up the mess, or I can go back and try to sort out, the bigger problem, change the global economy, basically.
Okay.
So that's what took me. So then I went back and I actually signed up for a master's in human ecology at Edinburgh University, which was like this fantastic transdisciplinary study.
Alistair McIntosh.
That's right, Alistair McIntosh, yeah, and Ulrich Learning, yeah, really amazing program. It was included like stuff on spirituality, but also a mini MBA, because he said we don't want you leaving here as a rebel without a clue. So he equip us literally in all different levels to make a positive difference in the world, and did a very good job of it. Kind of got involved in green politics and worked for a while I was waiting for this master's program to start with a Tibet support group in London, and in the meantime involved in Reclaim the Streets, which was closing down the roads and dumping a lot of sand on it and having a big party, that kind of thing. So those were the wild years. But at some point I came across Wilber's work, Ken Wilber's work, A Theory of Everything. And that really kind of shook me up, because I realized I wasn't really very into all the kind of woo-woo spiritual people who were part of the green movement. I was kind of, come on, make a difference, get out there. And I didn't really get it. And then I read Wilber's stuff, and I was, oh, okay. So it means, if you want to make a positive difference in the world, you have to, work on yourself. Otherwise, you just project your own mess into the world. Big deep breath, and
very succinctly put.
All right. A big deep breath, and then I had to, so I committed to a meditation practice and got involved in that, and that kind of really set me on that integral path, I guess, of looking at my own development in the context of the change needed in the world and the kind of dynamic of in and out. Established an organization called the Center for Human Emergence over here in the Netherlands that was to look at how do we take that kind of approach to the different sectors in society, how do we embody that and live it in our work as an educator, in our work in business, or in our work in the health sector, whatever. And I've always been kind of in and out of application and teaching. So could never do just teaching or training, because I needed experience and context to apply it in. And I could never just apply. I always wanted to share what I was learning from my application in some way, which is why I've maintained this blog, over decades now. And just trying, when I have time, or actually taking time to make sure that I try to share what I'm learning. And that, in a way, kind of led me towards ubiquity, because I'd done a project around climate change with a guy called Jim Garrison, where we facilitated an event, big multi-stakeholder international event in Brazil. And but I was starting to explore this whole world of energetics, and my kind of my bookshelf was growing with Lynn McTaggart stuff and Melchizedek and geomancy stuff and Wilber's spirituality stuff. I was kind of, okay, I get all of this, but so what? Why is it relevant? And I say kind of my genes. I've got my mother who's a Quaker and a children's nurse, and I got my father who's was a Royal Navy officer, engineer working with like steam turbines. And so I got the kind of the vision and the commitment to the social change, and then but you also has to be really practical and applied, right? Can't just stay up here as ideas. So I was interested in how to apply all this energetic stuff, and did a vocational training in the Netherlands called eco-intention, which with Hans van der Weg and Rijkbols, which was about how to apply energetic work to large-scale systems like large areas of land, organizations, houses, communities. So it was very applied, and it was great. But I then got to the point of, okay, how come we don't have an understanding in our world of a kind of philosophy, as it were, that allows all of that to be true? Because I could see it working. Healing works, and we know that from Findhorn people could work with energy to make the plants grow and all of that kind of thing. And so that's when I kind of thought, okay, let me go and do a PhD. And it was really an excuse just to take time to read, think, and write. And then I just found the discipline around the PhD.
Just on a point of clarity for my own understanding, because when I first encountered you, I was in London, and I was under the impression you were doing quite a lot of like business consultancy work in different organizations. Was that also a strand in, you had a business and you were running a business in the Netherlands, consulting and facilitating large scale change, or?
Yes. Yeah. So I jumped that bit. Yeah. So, I had a little company called Engage. With a couple of others, and we were basically applying a lot of this integral stuff to organizational change.
Right. Okay.
And did that for a few years. Successfully. So we and then from Center for Human Emergence, we spun off a consulting company called Synervate. Right. Spiral Dynamics, and then Holacracy. Because what we did at the CHE is we basically tried everything out on ourselves. So it was also an experiment in what would it mean to be an integral organization, to actually live that idea and concept. And then we would take our experience and we'd shift it to the consulting company, which would then go out and And Synervate, well, actually both still exist. CHE still exists at a kind of low level, but Synervate is doing very well. And so we also pioneered holacracy, from the first moment, I guess, and Otto Scharmer's theory U, all of that. We were reading the first papers, so we were on and in all of that, testing it out on ourselves, and then trying it out with clients.
But that let's go on to then your PhD, because you mentioned that, and I know that you've brought out a book based on it recently called Volution. And yes, I'll put the link in the bio when we put this on YouTube. Tell us about this integration, which seems to be foundational between science and spirit. That I think, I haven't read it, I've read about it, but this PhD or now your book is attempting to do. Can you encapsulate some of the key things that you found out? And maybe I can ask you some questions based on that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I mean, the impulse behind the PhD was, so I'd been, really immersed in spiral dynamics, which is one of the developmental models around how individuals and collectives evolve over time. And found it had really helped me make sense of the world and help people make sense of the world. But I had just a gut feeling that it was somehow too linear in its structure. And part of that was kind of discoveries around the fact that people back in the Mayan times, when in spiral dynamics context, they would have been at the tribal phase of development, had actually had kind of consciousness technologies that seemed to be highly evolved, that we were only just starting to be able to explain and discover here. So somehow didn't fit with this kind of very linear model. And I was, well, how does that all work? And then I discovered a dancer and choreographer called Dylan Newcomb, who put like hundreds of dancers through and sort of experiment in making sounds, like 8 different sounds, and then link them to breath. And to cut a long story short, basically found that there were 16 core energy dynamics that he discovered in that way. And then he stumbled upon the I Ching and saw that they matched the I Ching. And he'd been studying Wilbur, and then he saw that they matched the spiral. And so he said, who in the world is there in spiral dynamics who can maybe help me with this? And somebody said, oh, talk to Peter Merry. So
Oh,
he
right.
told me, where does he live? And I lived 10 minutes away from him in The Hague. It was
Oh, really?
one of those magic synchronicities. But we then started doing some applied research with dancers on the energetics of the spiral.
Okay.
What we found was that there was a pattern for beige, a pattern for level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. And then when you got to level 5, it was like the same pattern as level 4, but more subtle somehow. Then you got to level 6, and it was the same pattern as level 3, but more subtle. And so there was this mirror effect going on for these 8 systems. So that was kind of, okay, that kind of reinforced my intuition that there was something more going on than this linear developmental story. And then when I was doing one of the wisdom school classes at Ubiquity for my PhD, this guy, forgotten his name now, but anyway, he presented this model of a torus, this kind of toroidal form that is what you can actually see on the front cover here.
Oh, yeah.
And does this, but also a Buckminster Fuller image that had this kind of breathing thing of geometries, breathing in and out. And I was like, that, I didn't think, I just kind of felt at that moment that there's something about that that's a better description of our reality than this linear evolutionary model that we've kind of all grown up with and that dominates, the Western mindset. And so that was the impulse behind Volution. And I was sitting there one day contemplating, so we got evolution, but we also have this concept of involution.
Yeah.
Wilbur writes about, that is where things come out of the subtle fields into the material world. So they evolve. And my hunch was these aren't 2 separate processes. This is one process, and it is somehow related to this toroidal process. And so I was just sitting back at my desk here going, involution and evolution, what do they have in common? What's one concept that would connect them? And of course, it was obvious, because I'm a linguist originally. It was in the word.
Yeah.
You take the in and you take the air off and you get evolution.
Yeah.
But, okay, well, I've never heard of that. What does it mean? So I looked it up, and it means spin.
Does it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Or evolution.
Torus does. It's what everything does. What a cell does. It's what the universe does. What the Earth does. And I was, oh, cool. Okay, let's call it Volution theory.
Right.
So, and then so then I basically dug into that.
Could you just to stop you there, just illustrate for anybody may not be familiar with Wilbur's work a little bit more about, I mean, most people are familiar with evolution, however it's put out, but involution, could you say could you give a concrete example of something like that so we can match the 2 systems, as it were?
I mean, in a way, if we think of everything as being information, which is how the quantum scientists describe it, it's all a spectrum of information. You could say. All the material world around us is information, just a certain density of information. But outside of that material kind of density, there's more information, like a thought or an emotion. It's not, we can't see it, but we know it exists. And that's just slightly less gross, as he would say, information, more subtle information. So this whole spectrum from the causal, as Wilbur would call it, which is like the unified field of oneness, which you can't say much about, because the moment you do, you take it out of oneness. So, and then from there, everything comes, in gradations of relative subtleness to grossness, into form. And so the evolutionary process is us becoming more aware of more subtleness, you could say. Expanding our consciousness to take into account more of reality. The involutionary process is the reverse. In a way, it's coming out of the subtle fields into the gross. So a practical idea might, well, I mean, if you were to talk about incarnation, that's an example of involution, but more practical every day. would be you nearly always have a thought about something before you do it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's involution, right? It's
Yeah,
subtle, and then boom, it manifests
okay.
in the material. Yeah.
I think that's a very concrete example that everybody can relate to. And yeah, and it's a common part of our experience. So that's great to have that explained. So I know that I think you were supervised, or for your PhD, you had some um, educative relationship or supervision from Jude Currivan.
Yeah, she was my major advisor. Yeah.
Yeah, so I listened to her recently in a talk, and she talked about the big breath
Mm.
as opposed to the big bang, and this seems to have some linked to your idea of this. If evolution isn't a linear process, or isn't the way that we linear conceived it, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the match between those two concepts, your concept of evolution and this concept of it's a big breath rather than a big bang.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, if everything is this toroidal process, then basically you've got information flowing the whole time between the gross at this level, at the center of the torus, where it manifests, out to the more subtle and to the causal. So it's continually, which is a breathing process. It's kind of breathe out, breathe in, and then kind of condense it, as it were. So it's that more that's going on. So that's, I mean, it fits very well, of course, with Jude's concept of the big breath, because she was very very much part of my PhD process, and she was looking at particularly the whole holographic nature of relationships.
Yeah.
So in this, again, you can see it kind of in the image here, like in the lines, you've got this kind of pattern which keeps coming back.
Yeah.
What a hologram or a fractal system is, where you see information scattered everywhere in patterns throughout the system. So
It's just provoking my curiosity. So I'm curious about, well, where does time fit in to that emergence, as it were? What's the role of time in there?
How long have you got, Dave? So last year, our Science and Consciousness Conference was dedicated to time, to what we call weird time. So basically, we have this material world that we experience around us, and here we do have an experience of linear time.
Yeah.
But what you find at the kind of more subtle level, at the informational level, or when we're working with consciousness and fields, that time isn't linear in that way. So, for example, we had a scientist, a researcher at the Science and Consciousness last year, who had done experiments that showed, and normally when you're trying to perform for an event or a task, you would train yourself before you do the task, and then the fact that you trained means you perform the task better.
Yeah.
Well, same idea, except what he did is had people train after they'd done the task.
Okay.
Found that they had also, they could perform it significantly better than if they hadn't trained.
Right.
So that's kind of, and then we always do a remote perception experiment at Science and Consciousness, which is where a partner tries to send an image to their other partner. One partner's in the woods and the other is in the room, and they send them an image and the partner tries to pick it up.
Yeah.
We always do that outside of time. So the person who's trying to pick it up tries to pick up the image like half an hour before the person who's going to send it has even decided
okay. Yeah.
they're going to send.
Yeah.
And they still get hits. So you can see that, at that level, time is not linear.
Right.
Like Einstein said, time is a place.
Yeah.
At that level, you can kind of go to these different places, but it all kind of coexists.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, there are a lot of explorations of time. Last year, Perspectiva did a 4-part series on temporics of investigating this different relationships to time, as it seems to be necessary in terms of forming what needs to come next. So there was, Gebser's ever-present origin. There was Bonita Roy. There was different people that are your peers in the integral field presenting on that topic. So I think I was curious then because I bought your book at the conference we just met each other at. And how did Leading from the Field, this other book that you've produced, very elegant, simple. How did this notion of leading from the field come about in the work in these explorations?
Well, that was related to the energetic work I was doing. So when I was working with organizations with this eco-intention practice, what you do is it's like distance healing. So part of the work is, you know, I won't go into the details of how it works, but basically you're able to connect to the organization at a distance, and send it certain frequencies that it needs to help it achieve its goals, basically. The other side of it is coaching the stewards of that system. So it's maybe the CEO of the company or the person who's responsible for a certain piece of land. And you coach them in affirmation and visualization, because when you're a steward, when you're ultimately the one accountable for something, anything with a name and a boundary, like an organization or a defined piece of land or project, your inner state and the way you think about it affects the field of that entity, and that trickles down into the relationships and into what you can actually manifest.
So that's sort of more an example of involution.
Yeah, exactly.
Your thoughts and your ideas about the company eventually manifest in behavior and interactions and activities.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And that's a very good way of putting it, because leading from the field, I guess, is an involutionary guide.
Right. Okay.
It's okay if you can accept that indeed there is some energetic information field that makes up your organizational entity, let's say, then how do you work with that consciously as a leader? And so it's got 12 principles that, you know, from my experience and from the experience of the eco-intention work, enable leaders to create more coherent fields in their systems. And when I was pondering the book, I was like, the thing is, you have to get it at not just a cognitive level. You have to get it more experiential or a more intuitive way. And so I was trying to reduce the text as much as possible. I just ended up with this little principle, and at the back I expand them a little bit more. But I found this artist who was also, you know, had good kind of what should I say, intuitive skills. Yeah. So there's more at the back there, more information, that she was able to channel a piece of art that resonated with the principle. So she tuned in the principle, and then she'd get a kind of download of a piece of art that reflected that principle. And so now, you know, I've got a piece of art next to each principle, so that people can kind of get a more subconscious or transconscious or whatever experience of the principle, that it's not just words, but they can somehow get a feel for its resonance. So that's it's and I will often do talks on leading from the field, and the people really recognize it, you know, and they're so relieved that this whole massively complicated system we've created in our rational materialist minds, you know, all this planning and all this, that kind of falls away, and it becomes a much more natural way of working with our systems. And then we know, okay, if we can get these conditions in place, then the rest starts to look after itself with lots of synchronicity and flow. And it doesn't mean you don't have to do the work, don't have to do your accounting and, you know, create good relationships and everything else. But it makes all of that a lot less effort and happen a lot more.
Can you give us an example, illustrative example of where something shifted in an organization you worked, of like how it was at the start point, and then how these practices influenced the functioning of the organization?
Well, the funny thing is, let's take ubiquity, because I was doing my my last year in the eco-intention training. And when I started the year, it was called Wisdom University. And each year you do projects, so applied projects with these practices. and I kind of took Wisdom University as my project, basically.
Right.
The energetic balancing processes last about 9 months in total, not because it takes that long to shift the energy, because you could do that like this, but because it takes that long for the material world to grow into the new energetic envelope.
Yeah.
Right. And so 9 months later, Wisdom University was Ubiquity University.
Right.
So, and that's what often happens when you work with these systems, is that they go through a kind of evolution
Yeah.
phase of what it is they want to become. And when you basically, what happens is that the vision or the purpose for the entity that's held in the information fields, in the field of consciousness, kind of then gets to integrate with the material world.
Yeah.
That means that the system from the material world kind of grows into its possibility, its soul in a way, its possibility of what it can become. And so that 9 month is a process of making that shift from where it is now to where it potentially could be if it was to really manifest its purpose.
Well, that's an interesting point you're making there, because that resonates, because I'm kind of more in this educational and learning thing. But when I'm putting forward my projects, I always try and distill what my deeper intention is, reference what's happening to the deeper intention, because I feel that intention has a profounder impact than we're aware of, and by holding that and being true to it, things are more likely to crystallize around it, just simply because it has I don't know, it's a more profound energy, or it has a more convening power or something. Anyway, that's my.
I mean, the intention is the key to manifestation, and it fits completely with evolution, because if you look at that word, here comes the linguist again, intention, you break it down, it's intention. Something being in tension. And when you've got the unified field, right, but things start to come into manifestation when it goes from the 1 to the 2. And the 2 is a polarity, the core of the yin and the yang. It's two things in tension. Right? And that intention is, you could think of it as current reality and potential reality.
Yeah.
And when they come into tension, that's what starts getting this whole toroidal manifestation process going, pulls in the information it needs, and that information kind of densifies until it comes into manifest form, if indeed the conditions are right, for that to happen. So intention is literally the state of holding a possibility, not with attachment, with curiosity, feeling it, and then kind of being curious about how it would manifest. But it is the manifestation process. So intention is absolutely fundamental to that.
Yeah, I like that description of it's a possibility state. Yeah. And that creates something attractive in the future that's still to be formed.
Yes.
Not yet formed. So it's attracting formation towards that possibility.
Take that language again. So if we say it's in formation fields, it's things that are in formation. Literally are coming into form.
Yeah. And actually, when I did your presentation from one of your books, that was really quite a profound recognition of potential and possibility and things coming into form. And I think that illustrates also what you've said earlier about involution, as it were.
Yeah. But I mean, this is a nice, if you're wanting to go there, nice lead into where I've, the work I'm doing now with all
well, I was just coming there, so we're perfectly in sync. So but you've got this very varied track record, and I mean, diverse, interesting, eclectic. But now you've moved on to something that seems to integrate everything you've come before. So tell us about the work. Is it Wyrd or Wyrd? How do you say that?
Wyrd, W-Y-R-D.
W-Y-R-D. That has a kind of Anglo-Saxon feel to it. So can you explain what that is, and then what you're currently doing around fields of consciousness and what you're trying to bring into the world?
Well, Wyrd, actually also means spin, and
Spin. Okay.
also evolved into the word werden in German, which means to become. So
Okay.
actually,
And in Dutch, it's Wyrd.
linguistically, a word that describes the becoming.
Yeah.
And it was used in Anglo-Saxon and Viking times to mean the invisible web that connects all life and generates all life.
Yeah.
It was the weird. So the sorcerer would go into the weird to heal people or get their sense of, patterns in the future. And in the Scandinavian languages, it's Urd, U-R-D, which is basically the same word. But then it's like but then we went and buried it, very deep in Western culture. So deep, in fact, that although all of us when we all had a feeling that there was something more than the material, we had to import stuff from the East, like
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah.
Tao and think, whereas we actually have our own indigenous Northwest European concept of the weird.
Yeah.
And of course, it then got distorted to mean strange, and
Yeah. Yeah.
spelling got changed. But when I discovered this, I should know. So what we need to do is go back and tell the story of how we ended up getting to these weird technologies and this weird experience. So this kind of goes back really to the 1970s in Princeton, where one of the aircraft makers came to the School of Engineering at Princeton University and said, look, don't tell anybody, and this is going to sound weird, but our fighter pilots, when they're in the cockpits and they get stressed, they seem to be influencing the instruments on the dashboard of the fighter aircraft. This is obviously a serious thing because those instruments should be completely objective, and we need to know that we're safe reading them. Can you find out, what the hell is going on, basically? So Professor Robert Jahn, who was the dean of the School of Engineering at Princeton, was a good scientist. This completely challenged his worldview. So he didn't dismiss it out of view. He basically followed the data, even when it made him rethink his understanding of reality. And he teamed up with a woman called Brenda Dunn, who was a psychologist. And they started what became known as the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab.
Yeah.
So anomalies are things that don't fit our current thinking. And they spent 28 years researching this phenomena, starting with mechanical devices. So a big thing when 9,000 balls would fall over a whole bunch of pegs and end up in a random distribution curve at the bottom, if everything was random. And they would have people sit in front of it and try to make more balls fall to the right or fall to the left. And found that there were small but statistically significant effects because people could keep repeating it. And these weren't psychics. In fact, they stayed away from people who claimed to be psychics. It's like school kids and friends, people who would just come in and try this experiment, who were willing to put a couple of hours in to do it. And then they moved on to building a digital technology, which they called random event generators or random number generators, which is basically a quantum process for generating ones and zeros really, really fast. So you get a 50% ones and 50% zeros. And then they created different interfaces for people to try to generate more ones or more zeros than should be statistically possible. For example, like a line running across a screen, if it was 50-50, it would just run in the middle, and people would try to make the line go up the screen or make the line move down the screen. And again, people were able to do that. And so they had a number of different experiments and tools and toys they developed and played with. And and of course, they published it all peer reviewed. This was Princeton University, created papers, blah, 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 did the whole thing. Scientific community was obviously very challenged by it. So they had to really kind of stick to the protocol and show that they weren't, they were keeping to the rules. By the end of the 28 years, they'd basically proven beyond statistical doubt that our inner state affects the world around us.
Wow.
So statistically, nearly 1 in a billion that what they found is chance. So
Yeah.
there's like, at the end of this DVD where Bob Jahn shares all his lectures and all the papers that they created, he says, we've basically proven that this is the case. Up to you to work out the implications. And that was the end of it, right? And that's kind of where we picked it up. So
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so I got to know Brenda Dunn really well, and I was chatting to her about 5 years ago. So somehow we got onto this topic of the lab and all the equipment, and she said, "Yeah, we've got it all here in Princeton. It's costing us a fortune in storage, like all these big equipment, all the books, the research library, the journals. Half my cellar is full of it." And then she said, "Like, can you do anything with it?" And
Oh,
it was just
right.
one of those kind of magic moments, where you kind
Yeah.
of lots of things just go. And I said, well, funnily enough, I've just met this guy in the north of England who owns a 3,000-acre estate that has been in his family for 1,000 years, and he's committed with his partner to making it a place for transformation. In fact, they built a really beautiful retreat center there. They're rewilding the whole estate, planting 1 million trees. Broughton Hall, it was called then, has now helped them rebrand to Broughton Sanctuary. And why don't we set up a public place there where people can walk in and experience themselves interacting and affecting these devices, right?
Yeah.
Wirelessly, of course. Now, Brenda loved the idea because it would keep the work alive. And Roger, and particularly his partner, Paris, loved the idea. And so we ended up shipping the whole Princeton lab across the Atlantic.
Wow.
And for the last few years have been building the equipment. People can now walk into what we call Wyrd experience at Broughton Sanctuary and experience their minds interacting with both the mechanical and the digital technologies. So that's really cool, and that's the first kind of phase of it. And the reason that like you asked, so you're into this now, it seems to integrate a lot of stuff, and you're right. And the reason I kind of decided to put time and energy into it is because my sense is that the reason we're in such a mess we are as humanity is because we've forgotten the nature of our interconnectedness.
Yeah.
We've forgotten how connected we are to each other, to everybody, to the rest of life on the planet around us, and who knows to what else in the cosmos. But there is a field that connects us all.
Yeah.
We hadn't forgotten that. There's no way we could have done what we've done to each other or to the planet because we would have felt and known we were doing it to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I realized here was a potential bridge to the Western mind. Loves science and needs evidence, to be able to see that indeed I am somehow invisibly connected to this stuff around me. And nobody taught me about that at school. What does that tell me about the nature of reality and who I am? And those are the questions we need people to start asking.
Right.
They realize there isn't this kind of materialist separation of everything, but there is this deep web of interconnectedness between it all. And that through our inner state, we can actually affect and communicate through that web and affect things.
You've got a place where people can walk in. What's your vision for expanding the purview, as it were, of these activities?
Well, first, the space, yes. I mean, is to imagine, people probably know about escape rooms, these places you go to with puzzles.
Yeah.
Imagine an escape room that's driven by your consciousness.
Right.
So either as an individual or as a group, you need to create a certain coherence in the field before it would unlock the door.
Yeah.
Or turn the lights on or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's part of what we want to do is start to create these weird experiences, all over the place that are basically consciousness driven. And we have technology to be able to do that. And then what we've been further doing is developing the technology that was used at Princeton. So at Princeton, they were working with one REG, mainly one random event generator, and they looked at this deviation from randomness. So materialist science says nothing can influence these devices in the physical, no electromagnetism, nothing. And yet we know that people's intention, or when the group becomes coherent, that they do affect these REGs.
Yeah.
There is no kind of scientific explanation that everybody can agree on as to how that happens, but we know it does.
Yeah.
And then together with my scientific partner, Wolf Janu, he stumbled upon what happens when you have two of these REGs. When you have two REGs in the same experience space, then you find that they actually start to develop the same pattern. So they follow they have correlations between them, which should be completely impossible. And so we started to measure not just deviation from random, but correlation between two completely independent random event generators. And that's getting us a lot more data, which means we'd be able to build this, this fun little research instrument called the Wyrdoscope that you can put in a room or a space or a football stadium like Northampton University are doing. And you can, it will track the field of consciousness essentially in that room. So you'll be able to see when certain things happen in the room, how did that impact the field? What get in the data? And if something interesting happens, you, for example, press this event button and it stamps a moment into the data stream.
Right.
Turn on the mic here and you can say, at the moment, this is happening. And it will then, when you play back the data, it'll play you like the audio.
Yeah.
So to be able to capture the metadata of what's going on in the room and see how the field responds to that.
What's it detecting in the room then? What's the instrument that's sensitive enough to?
It's these random event generators.
Oh, okay.
System. That's the technology that's registering a shift.
And that can be reduced to that small, because I remember seeing pictures of Princeton. It was like monitors and cables and
what
that were massive.
You can get REGs now as a USB. I mean, these we have two kind of quite high quality ones, but we also have a whole Raspberry Pi microcomputer in here, you know, so that it can run the whole thing, and then you can export the data onto your computer and then analyze and see the patterns in the field. And by November, we'll have real-time analysis, which means you'll be able to plug a screen into the Wyrdoscope and see the field real-time responding to what's going on in the room. Now that's pretty cool. But that is going to lead us to the next series of products, which will be, for example, a lamp that we'll have by November that you'll be able to put in a room, say a meeting room, for example, and as the group in the room becomes more coherent, the lamp will glow more brightly. And as they become
fascinating. I'm not sure that I'm going to totally understand the science behind it. And do you have plans and funding to sort of take it into schools or experiment more widely with it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the lamp, you know, you could be used in group contexts. It could be retreat centers. It can be meeting rooms, etc., as I've said. But the next one we want to do, well, there's all sorts of possibilities, but is toys.
Toys, yeah.
To have like toys that kids can affect with their consciousness, with their intention, like have a vehicle change direction. Or the one idea I love is a teddy bear with a big red heart whose heart will glow when the child connects their heart to the That's literally what we can do. I mean,
you can translate that those vibes, as it were, into a manifest
into a technological
getting into the sort of realm of sci-fi and
Jedi
Avengers, the Avengers DCI universe or whatever.
No, it is. It's very much Jedi training. So what we've really got is like something that is an interface between our consciousness and our intention and, let's say, a technological response. So if kids can grow up with toys and things around them that are responding to their inner state, they'll grow up. Nobody can deny that for them. They'll grow up knowing that there is something that connects them invisibly. And then we've got gaming ideas, so where we'll be able to feed this random data into games so that people's consciousness will affect their performance in the game.
Right.
You can imagine all sorts of executive toys that can sit on your desk that you can be kind of playing with your consciousness. I mean, the possibilities are endless. So it's quite an exciting time.
You're really living up to your title of innovation officer.
Remembering that the purpose, that the technology is the means to an end, and the end is actually a growing community of people exploring the nature of their consciousness, let's say through the technologies, but sharing with each other, oh, you know, when I did this, or changed my state in this way, I had this effect, you know, or
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
did this little training about how to activate my Kundalini or whatever, or when I played with my third chakra, you know, I got this kind of, that's the goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
People starting to teach each other and learn themselves about our inner world again and how it interacts with the world around us.
That's gorgeous. I just in terms of what you've done so far in making this public, have you got a story you can illustrate of somebody that was, you know, skeptical or that had their conceptions of the world altered or changed by interacting here? If you could illustrate that in some way, it'd be
Sure.
useful.
A good thing for people might be on the website, which is gowyrd.org.
Yeah.
There is a blog, and on there there's a report from Science and Consciousness last year where we
Yeah.
actually show the data and how it changed, and link it to the specific moments during the conference where it had that effect. So that makes a very practical example of it. But we have visitors, right? Groups come to visit Wyrd
Yeah.
Experience, and we had some CEOs from Yorkshire recently. And interestingly enough, for the women, often say, "Oh, thank goodness, there's a scientific affirmation of what I know intuitively." And that's a big, relief.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But there was this guy who came in quite skeptical initially, and at the end of the thing, he said, "You know, I'm a physics graduate from Cambridge University. I came in fairly skeptical, and now I'm asking, why wasn't I taught this?"
Oh, right. Okay.
So it really, people go out, you know, when you ask them at the end, you do a little survey or something, oh, you know, mind blown or whatever. So it definitely, if doing nothing else, it plants a seed of unease
Yeah.
around the way they currently see the world and around the whole materialist story we tell ourselves, that can grow into curiosity, you know,
Yeah.
wanting to actually know more, knowing that it's not just woo-woo, but there is actually some hardcore science, you know, behind it.
That, yeah. Well, I think that there's also something very smart about using the artifacts of the material world and the expressions of the material world to give feedback
Yeah.
that isn't quite as solid and as predictable and measurable as we think.
Yeah. I mean, it's really about
Trained to think.
experience, you know, because you can hear it, or you can listen to Lynn McTaggart talk about the field and the intention, everything else.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense. But you get the experience if you participate in one of her Power of Eight groups. You get the experience, but it's about people having that experience. And so, if through toys or lamps or whatever the research device, you know, they directly experience themselves having this influence, or the group that they're part of, you know, things that they can't really deny,
Yeah.
then that's the key. Because then
Yeah.
whatever some skeptic says, or whatever some parent says to a child, you know, they won't be able to take away that experience.
No. No.
You can believe what you want, but I know that
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
this effect. You know, this happened. This isn't, you know, something you can tell me didn't happen. So now just go away, you know,
Yeah.
mum and dad, and tell me how it works.
Mm.
Or they go to school and say, "Hey, I got one of these weird toys for Christmas. I know I can influence this thing." How does that work? The teacher's going to have to go and do their homework because they probably know
Yeah.
about a lot of this. So it will hopefully accelerate the whole collective inquiry and exchange and research
Yeah.
around our consciousness and how it interacts with the world around us.
It's like a Trojan horse for the material.
Hey, tell anyone.
the materialist worldview.
Exactly, bring it down. Yeah.
I think that's a great place to stop, Peter. So just to thank you so much for explaining and going. We probably couldn't go into as much depth as you've studied it, but I think you've encapsulated enough for the public that watches this to understand some of the things you've been working with. I'll put the links to your book and your website and whatever on YouTube and whenever I share it. And just to wish you the best of luck, and potentially I might even come to Broughton Hall the next time you do something there.
Oh, great. Well, come to Science and Consciousness, 18th, 2nd of November.
Okay. Thanks so much.
All right. Cheers, Dave.
Bye-bye. Goodbye. Well, I'll just end the recording.